The air was thick with the scent of salt and blood as the longship rocked back and forth in the waves. The Vikings had been sailing for weeks, following in the wake of their leader, Leif Erikson. As they searched for new lands to conquer, among them was a fierce warrior named Rangvald, a man with a heart as cold as the North Sea. Rangvald had always been drawn to the thrill of battle and the rush of adrenaline that came with the clash of steel against steel. He always traveled with Leif to the new lands across the sea, eager to stake his claim on the untamed wilderness. During the occupation of a small coastal spot in America, they were constantly under the threat of Native Americans. During one of their scouting missions, they had bumped into a platoon of angry Indians. Rangvald stood at the edge of the forest, his battle axe in hand, sweat on his brow. He was a Viking, born and bred for battle, and he had heard tales from the fierce warriors that lived in these woods, but he was not afraid. He had faced many foes in his lifetime, and he knew he was skilled enough to take on anything that was made of blood and bone. When he was just a boy, he slayed a mountain lion. Tales of his fierce battles led the foundations of his legendary reputation. Some even called him Vigdrenger, which translated to brave warrior. Many men thought Leif Erikson to be overconfident in his beliefs of these lands to the west. Rangvald had pure faith in him. He was by Leif's side since they were just boys. They got their arm rings together in the same ceremony. Their friendship and trust of each other was deep and unbreakable. So was their spirit and determination. On a day most like others, sun shining, birds singing, they set forth to the forest to do exploration and wood chopping. As they stepped into the woods, he heard the sound of drums in the distance. He knew that was a sign of the coming battle. He quickened his pace, eager to meet his foes. The squad timed their movements in sync with the percussion. As they pushed through the dense underbrush, he caught sight of the first opponent. It was a Native American warrior armed with a bow and arrow. Rangvald charged forward, his axe in his hand, ready to strike. The warrior fired an arrow, but Rangvald rolled to the side mid-run, evading the projectile by feet, and continued, locked on the archer. He dodged another arrow and swung his axe, cleaving the warrior's skull in two. The battle was on. Rangvald fought his way through the woods, taking on warrior after warrior. Body parts and blood decorated the woods. Battle cries blended with the sounds of clashing metal and stone instruments. Music to Rangvald's ears. They were fierce opponents, skilled in the art of battle, but Rangvald was relentless. He fought with all his bloodthirsty experience, his axe flashing in the sunlight as his enemies fell before him. But the battle was not without its costs. Rangvald took many wounds, and those who didn't fall fled retreating. His companions watched him fall in exhaustion. Believing him to be dead, they never turned back to confirm it. The Native Americans are hot on their heels. He awoke a few hours later, sun setting on the orange skies. Groggy and disoriented, he wiped the crimson from his forehead. Once back on his feet, he began shambling in the direction of the shore. Wounded and extremely exhausted, he made his way back. It was vacant. In confusion, he looked up, horrified to see sails fading into the fog. As longships pulled away from the shore, Rangvald realized that he had been left behind, thought to be dead. Alone in the strange land, Rangvald set out to explore the dense forest that lay before the shore. The woods were alive with the sound of strange creatures and half-seen shapes that darted through the trees. Pausing for a moment to gather his energy and push on, he made his way deeper into the forest. Rangvald sensed that he was being watched. He drew his sword, ready to face whatever creature dared make its challenge. But what he saw was beyond his wildest nightmares. A werewolf stood before him, its eyes glowing with the otherworldly light. Rangvald felt his blood run cold as the creature bared its teeth and lunged at him. He flowed with its momentum, nearly dodging the deadly groping claws, and swung his sword at its midsection. The wolf was too fast. It dodged his blow and tackled him to the ground. A flying arrow caught the creature's attention. Another one hit the tree next to him, then one by his feet. Stepping away slowly as Rangvald tried to catch his breath, the Native American who had just saved his life approached him cautiously. The man was tall, muscular, with deep-set eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Rangvald had never seen anyone like him before. Still trying to regain his composure, "Who are you? What just attacked me?" The red-skinned man seemed familiar with his language. The Native American looked at Rangvald with a mix of pity and concern. "You are lucky to be alive," he said. "That was a werewolf." "A werewolf?" Rangvald repeated incredulously. "I have heard of such creatures, but I thought they were myths." The Native American shook his head. They are very real, and they are very dangerous. They were not always like this. They were once human like you or I. Rangvald raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? The warrior sighed deeply. Long ago, our people lived in harmony with the land and the spirits. But one day, a group of humans arrived from across the sea, and they brought sickness, a curse, and Christianity. Rangvald frowned. I pray to our old gods, but I am Christian also. Their Lord is mine now as well. The Native American chuckled bitterly. Yes, I can see that. But you are not like them. You do not seek to impose your beliefs on me right now, do you? To destroy what you do not understand? Those settlers did. They came with their Bibles and their diseases and their religion, and they destroyed everything in their path, the ways of our people. Rangvald shook his head. I do not understand. What does this have to do with werewolves? The man looked at him gravely. The curse of Christianity spread like a disease amongst our people, affecting some and turning them into monsters. Some say it was a punishment from the spirits of our ancestors for our sins. Others say it was a weapon created by the settlers themselves to destroy us from within. Whatever the cause, the results are the same. Our people were transformed into beasts, driven mad by their own hunger and rage. Rangvald listened in horror as the Native American spoke with familiar similarities and stories he heard from his own homeland. Is there no cure? He asked. The warrior shook his head. None that we know of. We can only pray that the spirits will protect us. Rangvald looked at the man with a new respect. You are brave. I will help you fight these monsters if you will have me. The native smiled grimly. We can use all the help we can get. He followed the man through the dense wood back to their settlement. When he arrived, heads turned in his direction and bodies were in motion everywhere, and it surprised him. Their ways were strange at first, and it took him a while to adapt. But as he observed, he became comfortable. Rangvald had never imagined he would find himself in a place like this. Green, luscious, fertile. Surrounded by the forest that seemed to stretch on forever, far away from home, he scarcely even knew which direction he sailed from. Even a week after living among them, the people still were apprehensive, but his curiosity drove him to let these things pass. They lived in harmony with the land and said that spirits lived in everything that resided amongst them. Their lore was fascinating and not entirely different from his own. He would listen to their stories and tell some of his own, which were met with equal curiosity. It was a scary new world for Rangvald, and also for the Native Americans to have such a beast of a man amongst them. But he was determined to adapt, and the people enjoyed his presence after a while. He had become known as a survivor, one who fought the beast. He knew that he needed to do more and be resourceful here. He started to teach them the ways of the axe, and in turn they taught him minor archery and fighting from horseback, a skill he considered more legendary than useful at first. But now, he sought knowledge and tools to aid his endeavors in any means necessary. The settlement was a simple place consisting of a few huts that were made of wood and hides. The people were friendly enough, but they were cautious around him sometimes. He was still an outsider after all, and they knew that he came from a world that was much different from their own. He was treated with equal parts curiosity and respect, given he was an apex predator amongst them. But the werewolf was unlike anything he had ever encountered before. It was a monster, a beast that seemed to have no weaknesses, but Rangvald was not going to give up so easily. And he had feelings that these natives would have some similar feelings of their own about this. He made a promise to himself and the settlers who had taken him in that he would do whatever it took to defeat this monster and protect the settlement he had grown to love. And so he began to train. The settlers were hardy people, used to living off the land and defending themselves against all manner of threats. They showed him how to track animals through this kind of dense forest, how to set traps and snares that were designs inherited by their ancestors, ways much different to the practices of Iceland and Norway. They taught him their seasons and how to move silently through the underbrush and snow. Rangvald was a quick learner and soon became adept at these skills. But the combat training he found the most challenging, as the settlers were skilled with weapons unfamiliar to Rangvald. Bows, tomahawks, and spears. He was determined to master those. His skills with the short sword and axe were legendary in his homeland. He spent hours practicing with the bow, taking aim at the target set up in the clearing. At first, his shots were wayward and wild, but soon he became improving faster than any of his mentors expected. The ferocity and unyielding determination of his character carried him well. They taught him the art of the tomahawk. Rangvald had always been skilled with an axe, but the tomahawk was a different beast altogether. It required a different kind of finesse, a different kind of strength. But Rangvald was nothing if not determined, and soon he became proficient with this weapon and a multitude of its uses. Finally, they showed him the spear. This weapon Rangvald thought would be most useful against the werewolf. He practiced thrusting and parrying, learning how to keep the distance from the beast while dealing deadly blows. Practicing on dummies that were 7 feet tall, he impaled them and tore leather strips from each passing sunset. As the days turned into weeks, Rangvald grew stronger and more confident in these skills, reminding himself, if it bleeds, it can be killed, and he was determined to test this theory. He could feel the skills that he learned becoming a part of him, as natural as breathing, and he knew that he was ready to face this beast or die in the effort. He also knew that the Son of God was looking down as he fought this abomination. Maybe they will take comfort in the thought that I slew this demon. His place would be reserved in heaven and Valhalla. Maybe he could take his own choice. One night, as the settlers sat around the fire, they heard a howl in the distance. It sent shivers down Rangvald's spine, but he stood up with his weapon close at hand. "We're ready for you," he whispered into the darkness. "Come face us! I dare you!" Nothing came that night. The moon fell and the sun rose uneventfully. Rangvald tried to make himself useful, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was always being watched, that the werewolf was lurking just beyond the trees waiting for its next victim to drop his guard. On the next night, a bellowing howl filled the night air once more, and the sound of it this time made his blood run hot, boiling with anger. The settlers looked at each other nervously, and one of them muttered a prayer to the spirits for protection. Rangvald knew that he had to be ready. He had seen firsthand the ferocity of the werewolf, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before it attacked again. The next day he went out into the woods to gather firewood. He walked cautiously, senses on high alert, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, smelling for bestial odors on the morning wind. As he was bending down to pick up a fallen branch, he heard a rustling in the bushes behind him. He spun around and reached his hand for his sword, but it was one of the settlers, a young woman that introduced herself as Ayana. She smiled at him, his eyes darting nervously around the clearing. "I heard you were out here. I thought I would come keep you company," she said. "Thank you, but you need to be careful. The werewolf could be anywhere. The beast waits for us to falter." Ayana nodded solemnly. "I know. We've lost so many already." Rangvald felt a pang of sadness and anger. He knew that they were all living on borrowed time well before his clan's arrival. The sun set, and after a sizable feast provided by their day's hunt, all inhabitants of the cozy settlement bunkered down for the night. Rangvald had settled into his own fur blanket, the warmth of the fire lingering in his bones. The sounds of the night were alive around him, but he had grown accustomed to them during his time here with the native people. Suddenly, a blood-curdling howl pierced the air, echoing through the settlement. Rangvald jumped to his feet, his hands instinctively grasping his axe and tomahawk as he scanned the darkness for any signs of movement. Suddenly, a massive dark-furred beast emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. The werewolf was massive, towering over the huts in the settlement, and as he let out another inhuman howl, Rangvald watched in horror as the creature began to tear through them, its claws slashing through walls and sending debris and flying limbs in all directions. The screams of the people screeched into the shadows, the terrified cries echoing into the woods as they tried to flee from the monstrous creature. Rangvald was ready, axe swinging through the air. He tried to take down the beast, but it was too quick, its massive frame dodging and weaving as it launched itself at victims with deadly precision one by one. Rangvald watched the natives fall before the werewolf's teeth and talons, their bodies torn apart in grotesque clarity. Finally, Rangvald found himself alone, the only survivor of the massacre. The werewolf had vanished into the night, leaving behind carnage and destruction. Rangval collapsed to the ground, axe spilling from his grasp. He looked around at the devastation. The settlement was in ruins. The people he had come to know were all gone. Only Rangval was left, a lone survivor in a world of darkness and terror, his ancient Nordic blood boiling in his veins as he was determined to fight. And with all of his anger, he felt a wave of red flash over his vision as he went into a berserk rage. He gathered his weapons, new and old, and followed the bloody path through the woods. He can hear its heavy footsteps crunching the wood beneath its feet. He was immune to fear now, tapping into his bloodthirst, ready to bring death to this beast and avenge the fallen rescuers. He smacked tomahawks into the tree along his path as he strode, planning ahead for an ambush. As he drew closer, he could smell the metallic scent of blood in the air, weirdly mingling with the odd odors of unwashed beast. His eyes blazed with hatred, and the wolf became aware of his presence. For the first time in the werewolf's life, it felt the hunter was being hunted. He turned and locked eyes with the bloodthirsty Viking in a strange moment of recognition. They both signed the contract of death with their gaze. Never breaking eye contact, they circled each other, scanning for openings, ready to take advantage on the other's behalf. Claws extended, spreading wide, blade gleaming in the light of the rising moon. A deadly silence fell on the forest, as if every life form present stood silently to watch the battle. It was the werewolf to strike first, lashing out with hooking swings that barely missed Rangvald's nose. In response to his swing, he went low, slicing a gash into the wolf's stomach. The beast backed up, clenching its guts, snarling. So was Rangvald. The whites of his teeth were showing, as were the whites of Rangvald's eyes. With blinding speed, he launched forward, slashing with his axe, and the wolf took a low stance and darted past him. Rangvald spun on his heel with his axe slamming into the wolf's solar plex. By the time he pulled it out, the gushing wound, the Viking had vanished. Terror struck the werewolf, unsure of what to do, letting out a blood-curdling howl. In a blind rage, it rushed towards the Viking, still bleeding from its chest wound and stomach. In its stupor, it didn't notice the pit covered in thin branches and leaves, and sunk into it, catching itself with its claws. Trying to pull up to the edge, it was greeted by a boot to the face. The creature fell, impaled by feces-covered stakes at the bottom. A painful grunt left its mouth on impact. Rangvald plunged a spear down into his chest. The monster clutched the spear's end, attempting to pull it from him. He released the shaft, letting the creature fall back harder onto the stakes. Freeing itself, clawing out of the trap, once again the Viking was unseen. Its back wounds bled, and from behind he was clubbed in the head with a large stone the beast grabbed from midair, chucking him beyond the trees. His blurry vision narrowed on Rangvald. The beast became desperate. Rangvald felt nothing. In another wild burst of energy, the monster bolted towards him in the thin oak trees in front of him. It was a guise. When the creature leapt, gravity kicked in and Rangvald drew the blade stuck into the bark next to him. Time felt slower as the beast fell, talons drawn, and when it landed on him, they were both in a heap. Rangvald pushed the werewolf's bulk from on top of him, panting in exhaustion, bleeding from various wounds. He stood victorious over the monster and watched it transform into the shape of a man. A young man covered in tattoos and markings. With the boot, he rolled over the corpse, and on his chest was a colorless butterfly. Below it, a bleeding skull. It held no meaning to him, but his thoughts were broken by the guttural tones of angry growls. He lifted his gaze to meet the gallery of glowing red eyes, all blazing, hairy, anthropomorphic shapes, the silhouettes of monsters swaying in unending columns in the woods. He drew his blade from the other tree, lowered his stance. Many shades of blood were spilled that night, leaving the American forest caked in insidious crimson. One could only imagine what hells he faced in the heavens that accepted his patronage. He may have died, but the beast of his lineage would speak forever in those woods, in terror and revenants.